Hello everybody. Tonight I'm going to play a record from old Disney archives. The other day I did The Haunted Mansion. Today I'm going to go back to 1964 and play the soundtrack for Mary Poppins. It's going to be interesting because I got this at a thrift store. I don't know how well it plays. It might have a couple of hiss pops, maybe some skips. Well, looking at the disc itself, there is a lot of scratches. I tried to clean it up the best I can, so we're going to go on an adventure together. I'm not going to do too much talking tonight, but I'm going to let the story play itself out. And without further ado, here we go. Already some pops and hisses.
That was me, all by myself. I'm a one-man band. My name is Bert, and being a musician is only one of my jobs. Some days I'm a sidewalk artist, some days I'm a chimney sweep, and some days I'm a kite seller. Today, I'm a storyteller, and I'm going to tell you a tale about one of my very favourite people, Mary Poppins. It all started in London some time ago, at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane, to be extra, Mrs. Banks and their two children, Jane and Michael. Right next door, in a house shaped like a ship, lived Admiral Boom, and it was he who warned me.
Storm signals are up at number 17. Bit of heavy weather brewing there.
I soon saw that there was trouble at the Banks for sure. The children's nursemaid, Katie Nana, was quitting her job. Cook and maid were quarreling. The children were missing. Mrs. Banks was terribly upset, and Mr. Banks was furious. After all, Katie Nana was the sixth nanny to quit the Banks household in 4 months. But things began to look better when Constable Jones turned up with the children. They had been chasing their kite in the park, and that's how they had lost Katie Nana. The children were very sorry and wanted to help their father find a new nanny, so they composed a newspaper ad for a perfect nanny.
If you want this choice position, have a cheery disposition, rosy cheeks, no play games, also you must be kind, you must be witty, very sweet and fairly pretty. Take us on outings, give us treats, sing songs, bring sweets, never be cross or cruel, never give us castor oil or gruel. Love us as a son and daughter, and never smell of barley water. If you won't scold and dominate us, we will never give you cause to hate us. We won't touch your spectacles so you can see. Put toads in your bed or pepper in your tea. Hurry, Nanny, many thanks sincerely, Jane and Michael Banks.
That wasn't the kind of nursemaid Mr. Banks had in mind at all. Angrily, he tore up the advertisement and threw it in the earth. Mysteriously and magically, the little bits of paper flew up the chimney, out into the night sky, and put themselves together again. The next morning, in front of number 17, there was a long line of nannies. They were there in answer to the ad which Mr. Banks had composed and put in the newspaper. As Admiral Boone put it,
They were a ghastly-looking crew.
the children peeking down from their window upstairs were very disappointed too. But suddenly, as they watched, a strong east wind began to blow harder and harder. And one by one, then two by three, the ugly nannies blew away, right through the air until they had all disappeared. Then from the other direction, out of the sky, came my old friend Mary Poppins, her umbrella in one hand, the children's advertisement in the other. She landed right at the door of number 17, marched in, presented herself to Mr. Banks, and engaged herself to be the children's new nanny. Jane and Michael were delighted. She seemed to be exactly what they had asked for. Michael thought she was a bit tricky at first, when she slid up the banister to the second floor. Then she unpacked everything from mirrors to lamps from what looked like an empty carpet bag. But the children were more surprised than ever when Mary sang a little song, and their whole nursery straightened itself up.
Just a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, the medicine go down, medicine go down. Just a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down in the most delightful way. In every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. You find the fun and half the job's a game, and every task you undertake becomes a piece of cake, a lark, a spree. It's very clear to see that a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, the medicine go down, medicine go down. Just a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down in the most delightful way. A robin feathering his nest has very little time to rest, while gathering his bits of twine and twig. The white intent in his pursuit, he has a merry tune to toot. He knows a song will move the job along. For a spoonful of sugar, wonderful magical thing to see beds making themselves and toys putting themselves away. Michael had so much fun, he wanted to straighten up the nursery all over again. But Mary Poppins had an outing in mind, so they put on their coats and hats and walked over to the park. I especially like this part of the story because, you see, I'm in it. I was a scriber that day. That's a sidewalk artist. When I looked up from my work and saw Mary Poppins standing there with Jane and Michael, I was delighted. Mary Poppins is a practically perfect person, and whenever she turns up, you always know you're in for magic and fun. The children thought we were just going for an outing in the park, but I knew better. When you're with Mary Poppins, suddenly you're in places you never dreamed of. And quick as you can say, Bob's your uncle, the most unusual things begin to happen. I told Jane and Michael that I thought Mary Poppins had a jolly holiday in mind, and in one of my pictures, too. Now's the time, Mary Poppins, I said. No one's looking. But she said she had no intention of making a spectacle of herself, so I decided to do it myself. I took the children's hands and said, you wink, you think, you do a double blink, you close your eyes and jump. Not a thing happened. That is, nothing happened until Mary Poppins said a simple 1, 2, 3, and there we were, right inside my picture of a typical English countryside, with a little country fair down the road and over the hill. I was dressed up smart as you please, and Mary Poppins looked beautiful. While the children ran on down the road to the fair, I just couldn't resist singing this song.
Ain't it a glorious day? Right is the morning in May. I feel like I could fly. Have you ever seen the grass so green, or a bluer sky? Oh, it's a jolly holiday with Mary. Mary makes your heart so light. When the day is grey and ordinary, Mary makes the sun shine bright. Oh, happiness is blooming all around her. The daffodils are smiling at the door. When Mary holds your hand, you feel so grand. Your heart starts beating like a big brass band. Oh, it's a jolly holiday with Mary. No wonder that it's Mary that we love.
Oh, it's a jolly holiday with Mary.
Mary makes your heart so light.
When the day is grey and ordinary,
Mary makes the sunshine bright.
Oh, happiness is blooming all around us.
the daffodils are smiling at the dove.
When Mary holds your hand, you feel your heart starts beating like a big brass band. Oh, it's a jolly holiday with Mary. No wonder that it's Mary that we love.
It was a glorious day. Mary Poppins and I danced. And then I danced with some penguins. And then we had raspberry ice and cakes and tea. But the best part of the whole day was when we each got on our own merry-go-round horse, pranced off the merry-go-round, and went carouseling all over the countryside. First we got involved in a fox hunt, and I rescued a poor, tired little Irish fox. And then we got onto a race course right in the middle of an horse race. You know one? Mary Poppins, of course. They gave her a huge bunch of roses. They took a picture. But when one of the newspaper reporters said, "There probably aren't words to describe your emotions at winning this race," Mary Poppins answered, "On the contrary, there's a perfectly good word." And she told him what it was.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Even though the sound of it is something quite atrocious, if you say it loud enough, you'll always sound precocious. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Because I was afraid to speak when I was just a lad. Me father gave me nose a tweak and told me I was bad. But then one day I learned a word that saved me aching nose. The biggest word you ever heard, and this is how it goes. Oh, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Even though the sound of it is something quite atrocious, if you say it loud enough, you'll always sound precocious.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. He traveled all around the world, and everywhere he went, he'd use this word and always say, "There goes a clever gent."
When Dukes and Maharajas pass the time of day with me, I say me special word and then they ask me out to tea.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Even though the sound of it is something quite atrocious, if you say it loud enough, you'll always sound precocious. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Of course, you can always say it backward, which is docious aliexpiasticfragicalirufus, but that's going a bit too far, don't you think?
Indubitably.
So when the cat has got your tongue, there's no need for dismay. Just summon up this word and then you've got a lot to say. But better use it carefully or it can change your life.
One night I said it to me girl, now me girl's me wife.
Gee, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. 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 Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
But even the best days must end, and when it started raining, we all found ourselves back on the sidewalk, and the beautiful paintings were nothing but a colorful puddle. Mary Poppins took the children home, got them out of their wet clothes, and bundled them into bed. They couldn't stop talking about the wonderful adventures of the day, And when they insisted they were much too excited to sleep, Mary Poppins said, "All right."
Stay awake, don't rest your head, don't lie down upon your bed, while the moon drifts in the skies. Stay awake, don't close your eyes. Though the world is fast asleep, though your pillow's soft and deep, you're not sleeping as you sleep. Stay awake, don't nod and dream. Stay awake, don't nod and
All right. Let's go with side 2. Yeah, I saw there is a few scratches and pops in it, and I'm sorry for that. There's not a whole lot I can do. Again, this record was pressed in 1964. Doing my best here. Jeez. Here, I'll put on a hat for a distraction from the skips. How's
The
that?
next morning I learned that Uncle Albert had his old affliction back again. I went to see him straight away and sent for Mary Poppins. She soon arrived with Jane and Michael. Uncle Albert has a very peculiar trouble. He loves to laugh, and every time he laughs, he begins floating in the air. He had a very bad case this time because when I arrived at his house, he was bouncing right up against the ceiling. He tried to explain.
I love to laugh, loud and long and clear. I love to laugh, it's getting worse every year. The more I laugh, the more I fill with glee. And the more the glee, the more I'm a merry me. It's embarrassing, the more I'm a merry me. Some people laugh through their noses, sounding something like this. Some people laugh through their teeth, goodness sakes, hissing and fizzing like snakes. Some laugh too fast, some only laugh, others they twitter like birds. Then there's the kind that can't make up their mind. When things strike me as funny, I can't hide it inside and squeak as the squeakers do. I've got to let it go with a ho 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 and a ha 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 ho 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 too. I love to laugh loud and long and clear. I love to laugh so everybody can hear. The more
look at that. There's something you don't get.
By the time. I'll bet she was having
Jeez.
as much fun as we were, but she never cracked a smile. That's her way now. We had a lovely tea, but now the problem was how to get down. Uncle Albert said we had to think of something sad. And the saddest thing we could think of was going home. And when we thought of that, we all eased down to the floor like blues running out of there. That evening, Mary Poppins convinced Mr. Banks that he should do something he had never done before. Take the children on an outing, a trip to the bank where he worked making money. She told the children about it as she put them to bed. On their way to the bank, they would pass St. Paul's Cathedral, and on the steps of the cathedral they would see the old bird woman selling her bags of crumbs for 2 pennies, or tuppence as you might say, to feed the birds.
Feed the birds, who'll feed the birds? All it takes is tuppence from you. Feed the birds, tuppence a bag, tuppence, tuppence, tuppence a bag. Feed the bird woman cries, wide overhead, her birds fill the skies. All around the cathedral, the saints and apostles look down as she sings her words. Although you can't see it, you know they are smiling each time someone shows that he cares. Though her words are simple and few, listen, listen, she's calling to you. Feed the birds, tuppence a bag, tuppence, tuppence, tuppence a bag, tuppence a bag.
Sure as you please. The next morning, on the way to the bank with her father, they saw the bird woman. Michael had tuppence from his money box, and he wanted to buy a bag of crumbs from her and feed the birds. But Mr. Banks would not permit it. He said, "When we get to the bank, I shall show you what may be done with your tuppence." Mr. Banks didn't own the bank. He was just a junior partner. The man who owned it was very, very, very old. His son was very, very old. The other directors of the bank were quite old too. When Mr. Banks introduced Jane and Michael, all the old bankers crowded around them and tried to get Michael to invest his tuppence in the bank. The oldest banker finally snatched the money from Michael, but Michael cried, "Give my money back!" and grabbed it and ran with Jane right behind him. All the people in the bank then tried to get their money out, and the bank finally had to close its doors. A policeman chased the children as they ran down some dark alleys. And worst of all, Mr. Banks was in disgrace, and the children got lost. I found them. I was working as a chimney sweep that day, black with soot from head to toe and carrying my brushes and my tools. And they ran right into me. Didn't even know me at first, but they were very glad to see me because they were frightened. "Who's after you?" I asked them. "Father is," they both said. "Father brought us to see his bank. I don't know what we did, but it must have been something dreadful. He sent the police after us. He doesn't like us at all." Well, I couldn't believe that. So I said to them, "You know, begging your pardon, the one my heart goes out to is your father. There he is in that cold, heartless bank day after day. As the lady in the zoo said, I'd hate to see any living thing caged up. Look at it this way. You've got your mother to look after you, and Mary Poppins and Constable Jones and me. Who looks after your father? Tell me that. Well, I think Jane understood what I was getting at because she said, Bert, do you think father needs help? And I told her I thought a father could always do with a bit of help. And then I took them home and began sweeping their chimney.
Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim cherry. A sweep is as lucky can be. Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim cheroo. Good luck will rub off when I shake hands with you. Or blow me a kiss, and that's lucky too. Now as the ladder of life has been strung, you may think a sweep's on the bottommost rung. Till I spends me time in the ashes and smoke. In this old world there's no happier bloke. Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim cherry. A sweep is as lucky can be. Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim cheroo. Good luck will rub off when I shake hands with you. I choose me bristles with pride, yes I do. A broom for the shaft and a brush for the flue. Though I'm covered with soot from my head to me toes, a sweep knows he's welcome wherever he goes. Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim cherry. When you're with a sweep, you're in glad company. Nowhere is there a more happier crew than them what sings chim chim cherry, chim cheroo. Chim chimney, chim chim, cherry chim cheroo.
First thing I knew, there was Mary Poppins watching me work on the chimney. As I told you, when Mary Poppins appears, magic is not far behind. And sure enough, when I turned around, Michael popped right up the chimney with Jane right behind him. So naturally, Mary Poppins and I had to go up the chimney after them. Everybody was covered with soot and looked just fine. Then Mary Poppins took us out on an expedition across the rooftops of London. And as I said before, what a sight. When we got back to the roof of number 17, I felt so good I called, Cheroo! And from all the chimneys around came the answering calls of all my pals, the chimney sweeps. Cheroo! 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 Well, you know, this called for a celebration. So we started dancing all over the rooftops.
Kick-kitties up, step in time. Kick-kitties up, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Kick-kitties up, step in time. Come on, you chimney sweeps. Link your elbows. Link your elbows, step in time. Link your elbows, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Link your elbows, step in time. Spin about, and step in time. Spin about, and step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Spin about, and step in time. Round the chimney, step in time. Round the chimney, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Round the chimney, step in time. Flap like a birdie. Flap like a birdie, step in time. Flap like a birdie, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Flap like a birdie, step in time. Here we go. Step in time, step in time, step in time, step in time. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Never need a reason, never need a rhyme. Just step in time, just step in time.
Things finally got so wild that Admiral Boone thought he was being attacked by Hottentots and fired his fireworks cannon at us. But we solved that problem by all jumping down Jane and Michael's chimney, and we continued the dance in the Banks house. We were all dancing, Mary Poppins, the children, Mrs. Banks, cook and maid, and having a wonderful time when Mr. Banks came home. Oh, he was pretty angry. Well, what's the meaning of this? He shouted.
At the signal from me, all the sweeps lined up and shook Mr. Banks' hand for good luck. And then they left. Mr. Banks was really fuming. Mary Poppins, will you be good enough to explain all this? First of all, she replied, I should like to make one point quite clear. I never explain anything. With that, she went upstairs with the children, and that left just Mr. Banks and yours truly. He thought Mary Poppins was all to blame, but I thought different, and I told him, Mr. Banks, like Mary Poppins says, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. And I think he got the message. Just as I was leaving, I saw the children come down to say good night to their father. And to top it all off, Michael gave the tuppence to his father. Well, I guess he thought that would make things right. Last I saw Mr. Banks, he was looking at the tuppence with a wondering look in his eye. Later that night, Mr. Banks was called down to the bank and told he had lost his job. He didn't even care. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious was all he said, and turned and danced his way out of the bank. The next morning, Mary Poppins started packing her magic bag to leave. The children were very upset, but she had only promised to stay until the wind changed. Suddenly, singing was heard in the basement, and up came Mr. Banks with a mended kite in his hand. Jane! Michael! He shouted happily. Up in the nursery, Mary Poppins said, Your father's calling you. Run along. Spit-spot. So run to him they did. Mary Poppins looked after them with a sad little smile on her face. She knew it was time for her to leave. The Banks were now a happy family. She had done what she had come to do, and Mr. Banks was singing to Jane and Michael.
With tuppence for paper and strings, you can have your own set of wings. With your feet on the ground, you're a bird in flight with your fist holding tight to the string of your kite. Let's go fly a kite up to the highest height. Let's go fly a kite and send it soaring up through the atmosphere, up where the air is clear. Oh, let's go fly a kite. When you send it flying up there, all at once you're lighter than air. You can dance on the breeze over houses and trees with your fist holding tight to the string of your kite. Oh, 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 let's go fly a kite up to the highest height. Let's go fly a kite and send it soaring up through the atmosphere, up where the air is clear. Oh, let's go fly a kite. By the time they got to the park, it seemed that everyone in London was there flying kites. I was there too, selling kites. Jane and Michael were there, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were there, cook and maid were there, Admiral Boom was there, Uncle Albert was there, all the bankers were there, and they gave Mr. Banks his old job back. Everybody was there but Mary Poppins. And where was Mary Poppins? Why, she was flying away with her old umbrella. I saw her. Goodbye, Mary Poppins. Don't stay away too long, says I, and I blew her a kiss. She smiled as her umbrella mingled with the kites in the skies over London. I know she'll come back again someday. Mary Poppins always comes when she's needed, with her spoonful of sugar, as she puts it, to help children anywhere in the world. Maybe even you.
But again, the old Mary Poppins soundtrack. You might be able to find it some thrift store somewhere. It's an old album. I don't know, but hopefully you enjoyed it tonight. So another one. It plays a pretty good message with all the horrible things going on outside around this day and age now. Just remember, we're all in this together. This is just a little bit of distraction, make you think of something else than negativity. Again, you can wear a hat like this. But you know what? All of you take care out of there, and I'm going to say good night until next time.